so good. The lady who directed one of those 40 Days for Life campaigns, her name is Sue Thayer. And Sue did something that nobody else has ever done before, because Sue, for the 17 years, managed the Planned Parenthood facility, outside of which she later ran a 40 Days for Life campaign that closed down that Planned Parenthood facility. Now, the story in between is pretty awesome, because Sue had worked for 17 years at that facility, and they did not do abortions. Now, that facility, like all Planned Parenthoods, referred for abortions. But Sue was taught the big lie when she was hired by Planned Parenthood, and she was told, well, we're all about preventing abortions. We're all about reducing the need for abortions. And she thought, well, if we don't do abortions, maybe that's true. And Sue had a real passion for children. She actually has had 100 foster children in her homes over the years, even during the time she worked at Planned Parenthood. She was a lady who really wanted to help people. And so she thought, well, I guess Planned Parenthood, what they're telling me is true. So for 17 years, she worked trying to prevent abortions. What changed, though, was a few years ago when Planned Parenthood of Iowa, her facility was in a small town of Storm Lake, a rural town, and Sue was told by Planned Parenthood of Iowa, well, guess what? We're going to do a pilot program across the state. There's just shy of 30 Planned Parenthood offices in the state. Previously, there was only one Planned Parenthood abortion center in Des Moines. And they said, what we're going to do is we're going to roll out this program called Telemed Abortions. And the way this program works is an abortionist in Des Moines will be sitting behind his computer. And the girl will come into the rural facility out in Storm Lake, and she'll get on a computer on that end and talk on a little internet webcam. Literally, no doctor-patient relationship, no physical examination. They just talk for a few minutes over this little webcam, and then the doctor pushes a button on his computer keyboard, and in the rural clinic, a cash register drawer pops open. No kidding, it was a cash register drawer, and it had the two little bottles of pills. One was the RU-486 abortion pill, and then another one that caused the compression that would cause the child to then be expelled once it had died. And so Sue heard about this, and she started researching it. Ruby, you mentioned 8 women. I just pulled the FDA report. 14 women have been killed by this RU-486 drug. Hundreds more have been very severely wounded. Some have been rendered infertile. And these rural facilities are not equipped to be able to deal with these complications. Sue said, that's bad medicine. There's not even a doctor there to talk or treat or handle these situations. And not only that, Planned Parenthood, you've always said we were about reducing abortions. We're all about preventing abortions. And all this is about is expanding abortion and making a whole lot of money doing it. Well, Planned Parenthood didn't like her speaking out about this, so they fired her, as you can only imagine. So Sue had a couple of years after that. She went through a healing process. She started going back to church. She started realizing all the lies that Planned Parenthood had taught her, and it all started to become clear to her. And last fall, she heard about 40 Days for Life. She actually told us, this was really great, Sean and I were with her. She said, well, we used to know about 40 Days for Life, and in fact, you guys' pictures are up inside in the entryway of most Planned Parenthoods behind the desk, because they want to avoid, Planned Parenthood hates 40 Days for Life. She said, so I figured if they hated it that much, it must be pretty effective. So she signed up to lead the 40 Days for Life. And Storm Lake, Iowa is not exactly a warm haven at the time of year, even in the fall, ending in November. And I saw pictures of them with a couple of feet of snow out there. They would have to literally go out and shovel the sidewalk. For some reason, Planned Parenthood didn't do that for them. I don't know why. But this spring, they were thrilled when they got the word that that Planned Parenthood facility, plus another one in Knoxville, Iowa, that had also been the site of a previous 40 Days for Life campaign, shut their doors and went out of business for good. And Sean and I went out there and joined them on the sidewalk outside of both of those locations on the days they closed. And just to hear a 17-year manager of a Planned Parenthood facility thanking the people who used to pray outside her facility, who she was now standing with, and thanking God for closing down that facility. Again, this is totally God at work. We were in Pittsburgh last weekend. We had gone over to Franciscan University in Steubenville, and then we went with the students over to Pittsburgh, went out to the 40 Days, another abortion facility there. And while we were out in front of the Planned Parenthood there, a lady came up and she said, I just wanted to thank you. She said, I came here about a year and a half ago, and she said, my life was a total disaster. I was messed up on drugs, I was in a terrible relationship, I was pregnant, and I wanted to get rid of the problem. I wanted an abortion. She said, when I got here, I saw the people outside, and they had their 40 Days for Life signs, and she said, oh no, those people are going to try to help me. I don't want their help. So she went to her workplace around the corner. She worked at a restaurant, And she was sitting in there when, sure enough, the 40 days some of the volunteers finished their shift, they came over there to eat, and she finally said, maybe this is a sign. So she began to talk with them, and eventually they were able to help her decide not to have the abortion. And as she was talking to me, she said, I just wanted you to know my son is now 14 months old. He is the best thing that has ever happened in my life. She said, because of him, I've gotten off drugs, I've cleaned up my life, and I just wanted to thank you and all the people who have made this effort possible. And those stories, we don't hear them all. I mean, the 5,600 that we know of around the country, those are just the ones we know of. And I'm sure there have been lives that have been saved right here in Fairfax that you will never know about. At least until you reach your heavenly home, and maybe you'll get to meet those children, or at least God will get to inform us of all the great works He did through our faithfulness. But because you were willing to go out and stand there, because you were willing to pray, God hears those prayers, and God has been answering those prayers. And I don't think it's an accident that right now we are seeing the tide turning all across this nation, and we are seeing so much hope on this pro-life front. And I don't think it's also a coincidence that this is all happening as we are right now in the beginning of the 40th year of legalized abortion. And if you think about when we hit the 39th anniversary of Roe versus Wade on January 22nd, that was the completion of the 39th year since abortion was decriminalized, and that led to the death of more than 55 million innocent children. But that also began the 40th year. And as somebody involved in a ministry that has the name 40 in it, I'm kind of biased towards that number. But when you read Scripture and you see the number 40 come up, it's a very significant number to God. And the number 40 as a time frame is always, biblically, always a time that God uses to test the faithfulness of His people. Now, many of the 40-day time frames are not only a test of faithfulness, but they were also a time that God used to bring about transformation, which is why we decided to do 40 days for life around that time frame. But it's always a test of faithfulness. And certainly we can think of all the 40-day instances, but the one 40-year one that we all think about is the time that the Israelites spent wandering out in the wilderness before they finally entered into the Promised Land. And when I reread that story, when it started to hit me, all these things starting to hit, I reread that story, and for the first 38 of those years, the Israelites were just wandering aimlessly. From what I understand, the actual journey, if they had just done it in a straight line, it was like they could have done it in a couple months. But they literally wandered aimlessly all over the place before they finally, the last 2 years, were right on the outskirts looking into the Promised Land that God had prepared for them. Now, they were out there in the wilderness because they were being punished for their lack of faithfulness during a 40-day period when the spies went into the land and they came back. There were big giants there and they got all scared. So God punished them 1 year for each day of their unfaithfulness. But they were still being tested during those 40 years. But that last part, looking into the Promised Land, and are we not right now seeing a glimmer of hope of a Promised Land of our nation once again returning to that founding promise? The first right identified by our founding fathers was the right to life. That wasn't a right they came up with. It was a right that God gave us that they simply identified and enshrined in our founding documents. Are we not seeing our nation beginning to point back towards that? Look at the polling numbers. I mean, the pro-life versus pro-choice, the majority is now at 14% more people self-identify as pro-life than pro-choice, to the highest majority yet since Roe versus Wade. And the two groups within that are far more pro-life are women and youth, much to the consternation of the abortion industry. Not only that, we see more and more people getting involved in the pro-life movement than ever before. We see the proliferation of pregnancy help centers, of mobile ultrasound units. All over the country, there are over 2,300 pregnancy centers open across America, and that number is rapidly climbing. And at the same time, the number of abortion facilities is dropping like a rock. In 1991, the abortion industry reached its pinnacle with just shy of 2,200 abortion centers across the country. That number today is 652. Two-thirds of abortion clinics in America have closed over these last 20 years, many of them just in these last few years. And again, are we seeing a glimpse of a promised land? I don't know. We also have seen that the number of physicians who are willing to destroy the lives of innocent children and violate the fundamental tenets of medicine, the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm, we see fewer and fewer physicians willing to do abortions, as many of the abortionists are now retiring, passing away. Many of them are losing their medical licenses, facing criminal convictions, as we see the horrific reality of what goes on inside of these facilities. Today, 87% of U.S. counties do not have one single abortion provider, and that number of counties continues to grow. We see legislative gains. We see gains on the political front. We saw the effort just recently when Planned Parenthood was defunded in the U.S. House by a bipartisan vote, and even though that failed in the U.S. Senate, we now see state after state after state that are taking up the measure to defund Planned Parenthood. They've lost over $84 million of taxpayer funding through these state-led measures. And across the board, Planned Parenthood is hurting. Their latest annual report just came out 4 weeks ago. And the indications in that show that Planned Parenthood is in a business of decline. Their total income is down. Their total number of donations is down. Their total number of donors is down. The total number of people who go to Planned Parenthood facilities for any services is down. The total number of Planned Parenthood facilities is down. The total number of Planned Parenthood corporate affiliates is down. And for the first time in 18 years, the number of abortions at Planned Parenthood are down. And that's why you see, when we saw the whole Susan G. Komen situation come up, I mean, basically, they're a wounded animal in a corner, and that's when they get dangerous. So people could say, why would they be willing to destroy the Susan G. Komen Foundation over a measly $700,000, which out of their billion-dollar budget seems like a paltry sum. But they're clawing and scratching for every dollar they can get because they're losing the view of the American public. They're losing every other front. They have to claw for money wherever they can get it. But what happened is, when they went and tried to do this mafia shakedown of the Susan G. Komen Foundation, the largest breast cancer advocacy and research organization in the United States, what Planned Parenthood revealed itself as is willing to just destroy that organization for the money, and showed that they weren't the least bit interested in women, and they certainly weren't interested in health, or they wouldn't have tried to destroy another organization that actually does something to help with health. So I think it will backfire on them, and we're seeing other organizations and corporations that are trying to ease away from Planned Parenthood right now because they're just a hot potato that nobody wants to deal with. But all of these indicators, seeing the people involved, this has been the largest 40 Days for Life in terms of number of people involved and largest number of saves. I mean, it's incredible to think about. That's just one small part. We were at the Students for Life banquet a couple of nights ago in D.C. Students for Life as an organization now has 700 college campuses with active pro-life groups on them. That's amazing because they know the future. Dr. Brushalski was going around the country speaking at medical schools, and they are having a pro-life physician go in and train medical students because the abortion industry tries to go in and they try to indoctrinate these students. So we are seeing so many signs of hope right now. And I guess my message to you is, you've been praying. For this 40-day season, you've been praying for, some of you for years, some of you for decades. Some of you have been doing pro-life work since before I ever even thought about doing pro-life work, and I really appreciate you more than you can possibly know. But what I want you to know is God is hearing your prayers, He's answering your prayers, and I really believe we are on the brink of a massive transformation. I don't know what God's got planned in this 40th year, but here's just one thing to think about.